I used to think the more detail you add to your painting, the better the drawing it will be. This was until I started other artists and realized this is far from the truth, and I have wasted so much time just adding details and details and details. So let's just take a look at a few artists and how they have implemented this in their art, and then how I learned from them and applied it to my own painting. Let's start by taking a look at Wolof. So Wolof is very famous for his paintings and the amount of details that he has in the paintings. But when you actually start looking at it, you'll see that there's a lot of detail maybe here in the face. But then if you look at other areas like here, for example, there isn't that much detail. And the idea is that the way they do it is that you really focus and you think about where you want the focus of your painting to be. You want people to look at the face in this case. So because we want people to look at the face, the details are in the face and everything else is simplified significantly. Like all of this area, for example, very, very simplistic way of trying to do it. Obviously, just because it's simple doesn't mean it's easy. These artists have spent lots of time mastering their techniques, and that's why they are able to simplify things. We can look again another one from Wolof. You can see the same thing. You can see the face has the details here, but then if you look at the background, there's a lot of simplicity here in the way it's shown. You can see that they're almost like scribbles, intentional scribbles, but but there's not that much time spent trying to render the details in those areas. Again, one more from Wolof, and we can move on to other artists. So we can see again, Wolof always focuses on the face, so we can see really detailed rendering of the face. But then if we look at here, look at the teeth, for example, very simplified. You can see even the hand here, very simplified, because the focus is not those areas, the focus is the face. And we can see that with other artists too. So it's not just Wolof that does this. Let's take a look at Sam Does Art. So Sam Does Art, this painting actually reminds me of Wolof's style, just because the way Sam really rendered the metal in this case, but it's the same idea. We can see there's lots of focus on rendering the face, but then if we zoom in and we start looking at the other areas, we can see there isn't that much detail. Look at this. Look at these things. The silhouette is kind of there to imply what it is, and then just simplified light and shadow shapes to show to imply what it is, but there's not that much detail. We can see the same in other areas of the body as well. The rendering is very simplified, but then if we really zoom in on the face, we see that so much time was spent on the face, because that is what our eyes or what the painting is, to focus on the face. We see it again, another one from Sam, where we see, Vi here is the focus. So that's why she's rendered very well. But then if we zoom in, the background here, they're just simply silhouettes with some light and shadow shapes. And he didn't really spend that much time trying to render. We can see it over and over again. Sometimes it's not just even backgrounds. Sometimes it's just objects around it, which is not supposed to be the focus. So for example, here, the character is the focus. This is Guiz's painting. But then we see the rendering of the objects here is very simplified. We can see a few lines to show the light and shadow shapes. Again, another one from Guiz. When we look at this, we see, oh, so much detail. But then when you actually zoom in and start looking at it, you can see that even these light shapes here, very, very simplified. A few brush strokes. This fish here, there's not that much detail, because the idea of this painting is not to have all of these details in the background, but the idea is to show the silhouette here and the focus on the character. That's why the character is rendered a lot more than everything else. Now, you might say, okay, well, that's their style. Well, I'll argue that other artists do it, that their style is also really focused on details. Bo Chen, for example, is really a League of Legends artist that is known for the amount of detail they add into their painting. So if you zoom in into, for example, the face here, you'll see so much detail is added into the rendering. You can see everything here is really thought out. There's lots of details here. Another example of Bochen's paintings, this one, and we can see there's so much, even little details of sparkles and different things that we can see. But then when we actually look at the painting, we can see that they use the same approach. For example, so much detail is put into the character, right? And the rendering is done so well, but then there are other things in the painting that add to it, but they don't need to be rendered that well. So for example, this character here almost looks like, if we zoom in, looks very simplified, no rendering. Even this one here, like, we knew it's going to be covered by everything else and it's really in the background. There's no even any details. It's just a silhouette and simplified light and shadow shapes to imply, you know, the nose and the mouth and things like that. We see here from Ina Wang, she also did this painting of Katerina. So the Katerina one is also, like, when you first look at it, see, wow, the amount of detail. And yes, there is lots of detail in the character. But then, because we want to add more interest or more storytelling, there are things added to it without detail of rendering, like the characters here. Simplified, you know, shapes and light and shadow shapes, because we know they're not going to be the focus of the painting, so they're added like that. We see another one here from Ina Wang also. This was for Magic the Gathering. Same idea, you know, the focus is here, this character. So the things in the background, we can see if we zoom in, very, very simplified. So when I wanted to start doing this painting here, the first thing that I needed to think, obviously I started with a sketch, was to also think about what is it that I'm trying to do? What is the focus of the painting? So it's good to always think about the focal point. So the focal point in this case are the characters, right? So now I know that I need to add details in my characters, and maybe everything else doesn't need to be as detailed. So this includes, you know, typically we think about the background, but there are other things that could be also as part of the painting that are not or don't need to have that much details. So the first piece of advice that I have to give, or something that I learned, is that to try and work zoomed out as much as possible. You know, a lot of times we just get so carried away because we're zoomed in and we're looking at these things so zoomed in that we think details need to be added. But then if you're actually working on it zoomed out, you realize that, you know, a lot of time these things that we thought needed details are not actually going to be even seen by anyone. So that's why try to working zoomed out as much as possible, and then zoom into the areas that need details. So when I started doing this, as you can see, so the background I thought doesn't need that much detail. So what I did is even created a few for the Spider-Verse area, created a few different layers and had every building or everything that is shaped there to be the same color, value, everything. So you can see that I have those things as a starting point, and I know that this is not the focus of the painting, so I didn't really add too much color variation in it even. Now for the arcane part, similar idea. So I know that, for example, let's not just talk about the background, but things that are around it. So we can see here, everything that goes here, I thought, well, it doesn't really need to be, it's not really the focus of the painting. So you can see even the flowers that I decided to add are very, very simplified. So I try to have simplicity in the design here so that the focus can always be the characters. Same thing with the other side of the painting, so over here as well. And then I continue, you know, added the values of the characters here, added more details. But you can continue to see that the details are very, very limited. I have very simplified things, and I try not to add that much time rendering these areas. We can see more here. So I added here, you can see that you might think that there's a lot of details here and I spent so much time. But if you really focus on it and if you really zoom in, you can see that they're simply just boxes, squares. They're squares, and I just spent some time adding some colors to it and erasing some other ones. I used some brushes here from Devin that she has for, making buildings and adding windows and things to create a little bit of more of a streamlined workflow. And I'll try and find it and link it in the description. And then you can see the more we go, the more I continue with this. So here, again, the background for the arcane piece, if you really zoom in and look at it, you'll see that there isn't much going on here. So especially if I also blurred it a bit, you'll see that there isn't that much detail. So all I did was imply the roofs. I said, okay, so these are probably some roofs and then some windows and light coming out of it. So simplified it very, very heavily because I knew that this is not the focus of the painting. Now, one thing that I kept looking at and I was like, this piece here looks a bit weird. And I realized, maybe because it's a bit too big, so I reduced the size of it. And now that there's not enough detail in it and it's smaller, it kind of makes sense and it works well. Then I started going into the areas that really need the detail, my characters. And I really spent time, rendering, adding light and shadow in the clothing, the different parts, the hairs, and really, really spent my time there. And you can see at the end of it, this is the painting, and you can see when we're zoomed out, the things that are here in the background don't really matter that much. Even here, even though this is in the foreground, it doesn't really need to be that much detailed and rendered because the focus of the painting is this characters. So the idea is to stay zoomed out as much as possible when adding these or starting the painting, and then figuring out what is the focus of the painting so that we know where the details need to go and where we can just, simplify things to imply what we needed to imply. Now, if you want to also learn about art style and how you can develop your art style, you can watch this video here.